So today we will have Mr. Dr. Anupam Khanna, and he is currently the Chief Economist and Director General at the National Association of Software and Service Companies in India. He has a long and distinguished career in economic policy spanning 30 years with the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and the Royal Dutch Shell Group in London, where he was the chief economist. After he returned to India in 2009, he served as a principal advisor to the high-level National Transport Development Policy Committee, and also served as a senior advisor to the president of the Global Development Network. He has held many senior positions in the World Bank, as well as advisor to other countries like in China and so on. And in terms of education, he graduated in India with an IT background, and then followed by a PhD and 2 MSc degree from Stanford University. So without further delay, I would like to welcome Dr. Khanna to share his vision about the IT industry in India. You can wear this on.
The point. Oh.
You can stick it on. Make sure it doesn't.
Okay. And this one works, I suppose.
Yes, this way.
This way. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Albert. And I'm going to stand. I'm short, so it's easier for you to see. And also, I'm a little worried that if I sit there, I may fall asleep because I just arrived 3 hours ago. And it wasn't just that I've flown from San Francisco, but 2 days earlier I'd flown all the way from India to Stanford. So I'm not quite sure if it's day or night. So thank you very much for the invitation, and to ADB, ADBI, and MISI. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I wasn't going to miss it, so that's why I decided it's worth doing the flight, even though I'm an old man. I'm 60 years old, so traveling is not that easy anymore. I'm going to talk about the IT BPM industry. It's often known in India as the ITES industry, elsewhere as the software BPO. It's an iconic industry. What people have not been thinking about up to now is that it is, it's in the context of global value chains. And it was only recently, I've been trying to get people in India, including policymakers, to think that if you think in terms of global value chains, you might rethink some of your trade policies. And I think that is the purpose of this whole seminar. So I hope by the end, some of my points that I'm making in the context of a very specific industry might be useful to all of you. Without further ado, let me start by giving you an outline of today's presentation. I'm going to first tell you a little bit about the global ITES industry, because it turns out not many of you have actually dealt with it. You may have, you probably don't know how much of it is already affecting you, whatever area that you are in. Then I will tell you a little bit about India's industry, because what people don't quite realize is how significant it is. And I'll tell you a secret. I moved back to India after 35 years overseas, and only about four years ago. And I used to think in the beginning that this Indian IT thing, it's a joke. In America, you have TV shows, and everybody you talk to as the Indian techie is a character in movies, etc. And I thought that this is, until I actually went there, and it was, I gave a certain number of talks, and I used to be modest until one of the joint secretaries in the Ministry of Commerce said to me, "Why are you being so modest? You realize that this industry is what is keeping the country afloat." And it's so I'll tell you a little bit why what is more important for the purpose that you are here is that it is how it has evolved. India, remember, is still a poor country. It's, as per capita income, you saw it's amongst the lower end of the group of the ASEAN countries. Most ASEAN countries have higher per capita income. India is also highly it's got a very diverse culture. In many ways, India as a nation is more diverse than all of Europe. It's got population double the size of Europe anyway. So many, and of course, if you think about ASEAN as a whole, India has the same level of diversity. The interesting thing is that today, many people think of, even today, many people think of IT industry as something for the rich or the, the developed countries. But what I can share with you is that today in India, I am getting calls, etc., and we are actually helping many of our states, which are, some of them are very poor, poorer than any of the ASEAN states, who are involved in now trying to use IT to transform their economies and also to become part of the value chain. And thinking in terms of value chain helps you to figure out where you might want to fit into that. That leads me immediately to the topic I've just mentioned, which is what are the determinants of entry and moving up. And lastly, I will talk about policy implications. Just to keep the whole thing grounded in reality, I will focus more on India, but I think most of it will be applicable to other countries too. I mean, for example, I was 3 weeks ago in a small workshop in Kathmandu. Actually, it was a workshop between India and Pakistan. I believe very strongly that, I don't know, is there anybody from Pakistan here? Okay, anyway, I believe, for example, that if you think about problems in East Asia cooperation, South Asia has even further to go about in terms of cooperation, and much of it has to, India and Pakistan need to come to terms, and it turns out that there are lots of things we can share and we can actually benefit each other. So let's go on from there. Just to give you a sense of the market, the global the IT BP spend, and this includes hardware, is we are talking about $2 trillion globally. It's a huge amount. It's more than all of India's GDP. It's about half the size of China's GDP, etc. Much of it is, of course, hardware, but there's a huge amount in IT services, software, business process, and of course, engineering, research, and development. And the reason India is iconic is what people don't realize. There's a big chunk of it which is offshored or outsourced. And for good reasons or bad, India actually today accounts for 55% of that, the part of that, those IT BPM services, so more than half, which are offshore. This, as people have been saying that India is falling behind, etc., it's actually not true. The last 2 years, we've gone up from 50 to 52 to 55. But there are some changes. We can't afford to be complacent. And this is an industry. Everything else, people at all stages of maturity can enter it. But one thing in this industry is absolutely true. You have to run to be able to stand still. So that's the big thing. The agility and movement. That's what the story is. Going further, just to give you a sense of where the global supply and demand today, the offshoring where the customers of this industry are, half of it is actually in the US, about 30% is in Europe, and then another big chunk, now growing part, about 15 to 17% is in Asia. The suppliers are actually, there are different stages in terms of countries, actually not, because we are talking to policymakers, we can think in terms of country. There are two countries which are considered relatively mature in terms of participating in this market. One is India and the other one is actually the Philippines. The others there are many which are emerging, and the emergers in Asia are basically China, and there's some argument. I mean, Singapore is a special case we'll put aside. Well, Indonesia might be an emerging one, but some countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and of course Brazil and Chile and Mexico in Latin America. This is just to give you, and we can come back to say where we are. Now, just to give you what is this industry and where the value chains are. This is, incidentally, those of you who are interested, I have deliberately, there are many versions I borrowed from a particularly good paper which was produced recently, and it's referenced, and I think you have it there. But the industry consists of what we call horizontal activities, the offshore services. One side, you can call them, are the IT industries, IT sectors, and these things in the middle are what you might call used to be popularly known as BPO. BPO is not just call centers. And then there is a whole lot of industry which is perhaps the fastest growing, which are the vertical activities. And I'll just explain to you briefly. This is the industry. One is these, the ones at the bottom are the people who are keeping the computers running day in and day out, you know, and they're like infrastructure. Somebody has to keep the lights on. Much of that is no longer done. You know, you might see every organization, whether it's in government or private industry, might have an IT department, but a lot of it is actually outsourced and offshore. You know, when you are often fixing things, or even when you're talking, if you are looking for technical help or something breaks down, often that work is being done elsewhere, not in your office. There's network management. Then there is the whole software. The software is the part, people who set up all the systems. I mean, if you're in government, you have various types of systems for email, let's just say, or if you're in companies, enterprise resource planning, all of those are typically customized, and depending on that, that is a huge chunk. There's applications development, everything from desktop management, etc. IT consulting is, I'm sure you know that most of organizations, if you're working in any big one, you need people to fix, okay, how can we do this, do that? That's a huge chunk of the industry. That's IT consulting. Software R&D is actually figuring out new software to do new things and develop new algorithms, etc. So these are, this is the IT part. BPO, these are all horizontal services, irrespective of which type of industry you are in. If you're, even if you're a small organization or a big organization today, this is actually imperative. There's virtually nobody who can work in this today's economy without having a reasonable IT capability. And I will tell you when we come to it, how even small enterprises today are improving their competitiveness because of this, and how, why things are changing, which makes them, which is particularly good for developing countries. Other part of it, let's forget the KPO part. In the BPO part, typically it's not just call centers. Many of you, you know, when you buy a ticket or etc., you call, and or if you're paying a bill, often that's the call center part. That's just voice. That's one small part of it. And but there are other parts which are enterprise resource management. You know, there's human resources, all the payroll, all the accounting, all the your health leave, all those records, etc., all managed here. That's inside the enterprise. This is the people who are working in the enterprise, everything system dealing with that, your records, etc. Customer relationship management, your marketing, etc. All of this today is dependent on this. That's what this is. Again, these are processes now increasingly professionalized. That's what, I mean, those of you are, I don't know how many of you are MBAs. Any people who have done MBAs? Yeah, so I'm sure these are sort of, each of these corresponds to a particular stream in management, whether it's public administration or private company. KPO is something which is increasingly happening now. KPO is knowledge process. Increasingly what is happening is, in the past typically a company would say, you do my payroll or you do my customers. But now they're saying, okay, this customer, all my customers, who are the ones who are likely to stay? Who are the ones likely to change in telecommunications? Who are going to get new mobile plans? How can I keep them in? Or loyalty programs, etc. All of that is a huge amount of analytics, of the fastest growing part of this. Now these are all what we call horizontal services. The other side of it is vertical service. There increasingly every area, whether it's healthcare, pharmaceuticals, whether it is aviation, whether it's electric utilities, whether it is manufacturing, etc. You're getting specialized things, especially supply chain management. That's a whole area that is that. This is what the global industry today is. Today, if we have time, we'll get into how different countries have developed strategies, including India, of actually moving up this. This is increasing value added. That's typically moving up to the supply chain. Similarly in this, and then from moving from here to here and here to here. And because that's how actually the supply chains are evolving. And increasingly companies which used to do at one time, before the advent of IT, did all this in-house. Now it's all professionalized, and they slice up the task and get it done elsewhere at much lower cost. And there are thousands of examples of that. We can get into the example. This is, I've put this in there because it's in your handout. So if those of you who want to know more detail for future, you can look at it. I'm not going to go in. The general trend in the industry is, and this is, as I said, rapidly, in 5 years, look what the change is. From 2/3 of the service, this offshore services being customer interaction, dealing with customers, it's not only about 40%. What is growing fast are the knowledge services. We're increasing analytical, once you have data, you can do a lot of analysis, and that's what modern business is all about. If you think about almost any aspect of, I'm again not, we can stop and come back if you want more details. Also, this world is changing rapidly. How many people here remember that 15 years ago there was no internet? The internet is a disruptive technology. It's changing things so dramatically. When I was studying business, I was actually an economist, but when we were talking about, people used to say, what's the risk-free, IBM was almost like, you would never have, IBM could never, it was as good as the US Treasury. In fact, IBM bonds were like General Motors bonds some time ago. But IBM was, as you know, has been in trouble in the past, recently. Even the Microsoft, you remember their CEO had to step down and you have a new CEO. These are all companies that people thought these are sort of things are there forever and ever. These are recent, but the world is changing dramatically. Facebook, do you realize how valuable Facebook is, how many customers it is? It has more connections than, there are all sorts of things I can go. This has changed. So the internet has changing the value chain. Today, increasingly, many things which you thought you would do in-house, you can't do in-house, but it's also creating opportunities. So these are new value chains. I'm not going to have time to go into, because each of these are typically a course in a university. Next one is, another big one is the cloud computing. That's another thing that you may have heard about. You probably read the media, cloud computing. Cloud computing basically, so one simple way is that in the past, you remember many years ago, 100 years ago, if you were a factory and you needed electric power, you had to generate your own power. Then even today, when we thought we need a piece of software or we need an application, you had to buy the software package, load it on your desktop, etc. Then if you were part of a larger organization, you could get the software in your server, your IT department got sophisticated software and you could get it on your desktop. Today, you don't need to do it. Where does the software, right? We call it in the cloud. It's all over. Anywhere in the world, you can get precisely that software which you're using in something around the world. That is changing the value chains. This one tells you what are some of the biggest names are involved in doing this. So again, I'm going to skip that, just to tell you these are all the various companies which are different types of things, so I'm skipping it. This is just to give you an idea, those of you, a short introduction to what the IT industry looks like today. Probably very confusing, but we can ask questions. Now, the Indian IT industry. Indian IT industry has gone far. It's no longer this. When people in America, they don't even know where India is, so they would confuse it with Indiana. So that's what this is about. The guy is saying they outsource 80% of their workforce to Indiana. Okay, India is now the global sourcing hub. It is, as I said, 55% of the global sourcing market. By sourcing, it's not all IT, it's that IT which is outsourced, which you don't do in-house in your company. That's a part, but a huge chunk of that. The other locations are, in India, the thing about it is almost all the activities I showed in the first chart we are involved in. Major companies are involved in every part of it. Other countries are actually doing this and they are doing very well, but they are typically specializing in particular areas. So, for example, Chinese software industry is actually bigger in many ways than India, but they are basically serving only the domestic market. They are plugged into the particular way Chinese enterprises are done. Philippines, for example, is very active, but actually it turns out some of the most biggest investors in the Philippines outsourcing industries are actually Indian companies. And I'll tell you why Indian companies are actually investing in the Philippines. They're all global providers. These are just, I was asked in the outline some of the questions, who are the major providers in India? These are all there. This is just to give you an example. Even if you are an Indian company, your big chunk of people are actually sitting in India, but typically this is how one is organized. This is actually a few years old. It's 3 or 4 years old, but you have what they call delivery centers. Typically, that's where you have specialization, and then you have customer centers, and of course the headquarters in Mumbai for this company. So this is typically where an Indian IT company would typically be active and would have people working in facilities and plants. That's what global delivery is all about. This is again, it's a version of what they did, why they did, etc. We can come back to it, but just to tell you that's a global. I'm just giving you an example of an Indian company. But equally important in India is that it's not just Indian companies who are doing it. My association, which is the National Association of Software and Service Companies, typically people think, oh, it must be an industry lobby group. What do industry lobby groups typically do? Industry lobby groups go for protection. We don't want, if the other guys people are coming in from the outside, we have to protect our industry. Actually, our association is not just, we take a different approach. We say any company which creates jobs and creates economic value in India is welcome to be our member. On our board, we don't have just the major Indian companies like Tata's and Infosys and Wipro and others, but also IBM, Microsoft, Yahoo, because they're creating thousands of jobs. Today, nobody knows the exact number because companies are very sensitive about it. Accenture and IBM probably have more employees in India than they have in the United States. So I'm just wanting, now this tells you where they are doing, and India remains accounts for the largest number of entries there. And the reason I'm mentioning this is most easy, and to understand global value chains when you think in terms of a multinational corporation. Because then you'll say what are the decisions they're making and where and why. And so that's why I've given you this example, and these are, for example, they're active in East Asia, they're active in Central Eastern Europe, Latin America, and of course in India. This is what determines them. The fact of the matter is most business worries about profits and cost competitiveness. And the reason India is able to get such a large share is in this particular area, we are by far quite strongly competitive in all areas, and even in spite of rapidly rising wages, etc. We typically give for the cost for doing something, the savings are of the order of 70 to 75% to do something in India compared to a US benchmark. Philippines is also competitive, but we have we monitor this across the board. Just to give you an example, that that when you are going to be competing, you will be competing with these people, but it's possible to compete with them. India, people used to think India, how can we ever compete with Poland, Mexico, Brazil, China? But we did. Okay, these are some of the reason I'm getting into this now is quickly, what does competitiveness mean? It's not just cost. I gave you the cost. That's an easy one to get certain numbers, and I can tell you how did that. Because this is which leads to policy. First of all, you have to think about, and because we have a group of countries, and you may decide, thinking on in value chain terms, there are certain parts of the value chain you might want to get into. The first point I'm going to tell you is that your competitiveness varies. In India, our different states, for example, are competitive in different ways in different segments, and we have finer divisions. But if you are in voice, for example, the Philippines is way ahead, according to us, is very competitive, better than India too, because of, especially for selling to the American market. And that's, you can imagine why. We can come back to that. KPO, knowledge processing, and in business processes, India's business tradition, long years of entrepreneurship, English language, and huge amount of engineering and science talent, meaning graduates, are the big source of our competitiveness. And but you can see comparing it with these are different dimensions: language, government support, labor pool, infrastructure, educational system, cost, political and economic environment, transparency to a great, cultural compatibility, and global and legal maturity. So that's what the situation was, just to give you a sense of how much people think, oh, already they are so far ahead, but this happened only in the last 10, 15 years. We've worked, this company, this industry in the last 10 years has gone 10 times. So it's possible, even if you are a bit, very small, it's possible to grow fast. It is no magic. It was able to. So just to give you an idea that it was about 10 billion there, and this, I'm sorry, I got the wrong slide here. Today, India's industry is about $120 billion total, and out of which about 85 to 90 billion are foreign exchange earnings. So 3/4 of it is basically export earnings. Employment has grown from nothing to, it was very small. In fact, you could not find it in our national statistics. It's again, sorry, I put the wrong slide here. This is now about 3.1 million direct employees. Direct employees, each employee, we have, some economic institutes have done work, said that each direct employment in the IT industry creates about 4 employees indirectly, and we can explain why. So you might say, oh, in such a big country, 15 million jobs in the last decade, oh, it's a big deal. Actually, our total, most of our labor force is in rural areas. In urban areas, the dominant number of people which are coming, almost more than half the urban jobs that are being created by this industry. Our total trade structure has changed in the last 20 years. You see, modern services is, most of it is, the story is about IT. Just to give you an idea, this is there are very few areas where India does well. We always, there is China, in India, every chart we go, we always compare ourselves to India, and then we get discouraged. China goes there and India goes here. But this is one area where we, but the story, and I'm going very fast, I know, but the story is actually not about volumes. This is about volumes. The story is actually about something else. It's about moving up the value chain, you can call it, of moving greater value added. 2 years ago, the IMF prepared a report. It was pretty negative on India, actually. But there was one positive thing. The IMF said that they have actually done, through all their studies, their analysis was there's something called sophistication of export. It's not how much you export, but what do you export? What sorts of, how sophisticated you are, how much you are increasing your capabilities. And most of the things, countries which have been very successful, China being a prime example, showed fast growth in the sophistication. India, but they then did a study, put manufacturing aside and looked at services. And this is the story in services. About year 2000, India broke out and sort of, this story, if you plot this curve on IT exports, it's really a story about IT exports. So that's what so quickly today, IT exports, it's not just IT services, not just business process management, it's also engineering R&D. This is something that other countries, developing countries, are also doing, which includes, it started off by CAD/CAM, designing auto parts, other sort of equipment, which I'm sure today you must have done when you were doing manufacturing things, design and R&D. This is a very fast growing area, but what people don't realize this is an area which is the offshoring is going at twice the rate at which the actual expenditure is. So huge amount, there's a huge demand for such services, and the developed countries don't have the resources, meaning human resources, to deliver those services. So they are actually looking at a huge amount, and up to now I think the countries which have benefited the most are actually China and India and Brazil, but there's no reason why, given the new set of technologies available, why it cannot be sliced up and many other countries can get into. Software products is again, and software products you should think about products which can be sold increasingly not just to the developed world but all over the other countries. And lastly, the fastest growing, and this is actually booming, with all over, and I don't know how many of you have read about the Alibaba IPO. This is a Chinese company. It's, you know, it's going to beat any of the Silicon Valley ones. And this is, but this is WhatsApp. People have heard about WhatsApp? You know WhatsApp, why they have that billions of dollar valuation? It's because, not because of anything in the West, it's because of their customer base in Asia. It's a dominant one in India, and I'm told also in Indonesia. It's the value of WhatsApp is coming out of Asia. So just to tell you, that is internet and e-commerce. Okay, I think I'm going too much. This is various ways. Please read those of you who are interested, go through that. I don't have time to get into detail because I promised I will focus on policy implications. So this is part of the same thing I told you about internet and e-commerce, but the reason I did it is especially important for developing countries, which I think most of us are, and that is, we call it SMAC. It's not about kissing, it's about social, mobility, social media, mobility, analytics, and cloud. What this is doing, it's democratizing. Today, as I said, in the past, if you were a small enterprise, you couldn't really afford too much computer system or software. You don't need to buy that. You don't need to put any capital equipment. You pay by the hour. Just like you have power by the hour, you have software by the hour, software as a service. And that is actually making a lot of this available and affordable for the world around. So that is changing. It's a disruptive technology. Okay, now what has, I've already told you, this is the data I mentioned about India. Just to give you, people think about, one of the problems when we think about value chains, etc., people think it's only about the big boys, $1 billion, $10 billion companies. We also have one of our companies is about $10 billion now. But it's not just about them. The Indian IT industry, only about it's about 150 are the big ones, which are about $100 million or more. We have our own membership has about 1,500 of them, which are in the small size players, but of course there are many more who are not even our members. Some of the most recent interesting thing that's happening is our small enterprises, and the reason behind all of them is, in the past, if you wanted to be in this industry, you had to have the capabilities along the whole value chain. Today, because of all the developments I'm talking about, and I've hinted only at them, small companies can get into a small part of it, supply that, and it provides an entry into that. And so in India, we ourselves have a program now to promote 10,000 startups, 10,000 in the next 7 years. And we are quite confident we'll get that much. And because there's a lot of ferment, a lot of people, if you give them freedom, they'll be able to do that. I'm just going to skip this part about the macro numbers, which are the areas. It's all in there. You can look at it. I told you about software and engineering research. I'm telling you about the idea, what are some of the trends, globalization, verticalization, and so on. This is about GICs. I was telling you that the global in-house centers, which are basically multinationals, when they set up subsidiaries, often they set up subsidiaries to sell to that market. But another part of what they do, at least in this business is, and that's related to value chains, is that they will set up a wholly owned subsidiary in a company which only supplies back to their other subsidiaries and other businesses all over the world, typically only to the head office, but not really only to the head office, but different parts. This is a way of sort of how the value chain model has evolved in this industry. So I thought this would be a good example to use as to why they're doing it in India and what is happening. In the past, it was all about cost competitiveness, cost arbitrage and closeness to the client. For example, they needed to do something quickly, and in the beginning in India, what typically the companies, let's say a bank, a famous bank, set up a in-house center. What they did was initially is, okay, we need you to take care of IT all over in all our Indian branches. Then they said, aha, no, what you need to do is you will develop the IT for all our Asian branches. That was delivery efficiency and cost. That's how they started off. Then it went off. Then they realized that some of the designs that they had come up with, and this is not just in banks, that this was actually very useful for other developing countries which didn't have as sophisticated systems. Some of the designs, you know, when you were doing this, they realized, oh, that's a pretty interesting, clever way that they had developed this software. Why don't we use this software for all our branches? They started using it for all the branches. So that's what was happening, domain expertise and so on. And now they're increasingly asking their in-house centers to actually take whole, parts of the whole system and develop new systems for it. For example, what people don't realize is that in India we don't have much manufacturing, but a lot of the design of chips, we have a very sophisticated industry. Lots of people are doing it. Microsoft has a huge design center. General Electric in engineering has a huge design center. And increasingly they are not doing just, they're not just told do this, but they're told it. And it's not just in India, it's also in Russia. This is basically all the factors that are determining that. And so I now come to the last part quickly. Effectiveness in service value chains. What are some of the factors? Human capital, intangible assets, digital infrastructure, institutional quality, domestic regulations, international connectedness, stakeholder involvement, policy focus. I suspect several of these are things that you have actually been discussing in the last couple of days. So I won't get into all of them, but I will focus primarily on human capital and then maybe one about innovation. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Typically competitiveness, what you know, it's not just cost, it's the skill shortage, and you then figure out which functions you might be having the skills, and then you can go further. Okay, human capital is the essential, this is from, the references are here, and you might be able to follow that. This is one of the most important factor that goes into location, skills. And different types of skills, if you're in the IT business, you're in the BPO business and the KPO business. That, as I told you earlier, we have the biggest source of our competitive advantage is this, and that is because when this industry developed, these chains had not been articulated as much, so there was a premium on companies wanting a whole range of things. Things are changing now. Yes, that is still a source of competitive advantage if a company says that, you know, if I'm going to get this part done here, maybe I should have all the part done there itself. But increasingly they will find that, no, I can get this part done better in this country, and I can have customer interaction, especially Spanish speaking people, etc., being done somewhere else, other language capabilities here. Oh, and actually Russia has a much better, has much stronger, long, deep bench strength in computer science and mathematics, so some of the sophisticated algorithms will get them developed there. So in, what happens is similarly you have people, willing to break it up into individual smaller chunks. This is the part here was, it's not just about technical skills, and I actually have another slide which will get into that. I told you about the development, but this slide, India, as I said, the joke used to, the iconic or almost a joke was that it's all, India is full of techies, people who can eat software for breakfast and computers for lunch, that sort of type of guy. That's, yeah, we have a lot of those, but there aren't that many actually there also. But what is happening over the last is that the number of people who the industry is hiring has diversified dramatically. Look, it's only 40% of the people, 40 to 50% who are the techies. The others are people with domain skills. Increasingly you will find people, if you're in retail or aviation, or aviation industry is booming everywhere. You need people who understand aviation. Those are the skills people are needing. You can buy some of the technical skills which is getting increasingly automated. You can get those anywhere. So, that's the main part. Soft skills are people skills. Let me give you a very simple example. You know, people said, why is it that Philippines, our government was very worried. Are we losing ground to the Philippines? How come Philippines now has, there was some report that has more people providing voice services than India? You know, are we losing competitive? We found out, we did some research, we asked our companies. It turned out many of our Indian companies actually are big investors. Many of the are buying up companies in the Philippines or actually expanding in the Philippines. So we asked them why. You know, they did surveys and they found that for many customer interaction services, the Philippines, it was not just the accent, it was not just the you know, that they have an American twang and that's why American customers are better, more comfortable. They said when the Philippines has a sort of a tradition of dealing with customers, more of a service mentality. When you, this is, I don't know, this is a survey, so I'm telling you what this finding was. I found it intriguing. They said when an Indian reads the script, all of these people read the script, you call them and they say, they'll ask you this. And Indian, it becomes very clear to the customer that they're reading from a script. But when the Philippines answer, it seems that they are genuinely empathetic. They see our pain. And for a customer who's calling in, they want that sympathy and empathy. So it's those are, I've given you an extreme form, but this is a question of soft skills. Dealing with business, dealing with understanding, trying to understand all those sort of things. That was an extreme one, but that's what I meant. In India, we are, for a variety of reasons, and this is what's happening, our government, this industry is highly concentrated. Up to now, 90-95% was in 6 cities. Now it is now increasingly, I would say about 10 more cities are increasingly in play. All the factors which are making it possible for these other cities to be in play or be candidate are the sorts of factors which other countries and people, if they focus on it, they can grab some of that. I'm not sure people in India would like my idea of growing the competition, but I think this industry is huge and there's enough space for everybody. So, okay, I'm just going to skip here. And the other issue about going forward, global value chains, is that this industry depends on innovation. Innovation doesn't mean high-tech R&D. Innovation means thinking new. And that is where a huge amount of things are occurring. And because of some of the technology things, you will find, I was talking to somebody, you know, this colleague I met from Pakistan, very interesting, some really interesting stuff happening there. It's a small company based out of Lahore. I was talking to a World Bank colleague who was telling me about some things happening in, I think he was, I don't know if it was happening in Georgia, but I think he was also talking about Turkmenistan. You know, I was surprised. I've forgotten whether it was, we discussed 3 or 4 countries with Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan. But, you know, things, interesting things can happen and useful business propositions arise everywhere. Lastly, the point is people think about this industry as being something which is only razzle-dazzle, you know, iPads, smartphones, etc. But these things are actually changing very dramatically. Cheap phones are smartphones, a huge amount of innovation using very cheap phones for doing very sophisticated functions. That's a lot of activity happening. So it's not just hypermobility for people like the lady on the left. There are also people who are doing other work, and this thing can do. So I've just given you an example. This is something in terms of policy our government is trying to promote, is promoting inclusive innovation, innovation which is going to make changes, and all of these are highly successful innovations for the bottom of the pyramid or close to bottom of the pyramid. And I can tell you more about it. So it's not. Lastly, these are some of the policy things that India is trying to, we have as NASSCOM identified that how we make this thing go to the next orbit. They've gone to $120 billion. Our hope is that over the next, by next decade, we'll go to $300 billion. That's you know, more than multiplied by 2.5 times. So what are the sorts of things we are doing? Improving the business environment, and these I think are universally applicable. broaden and deepen the role in Indian economy and society, which is in any society, support for SMEs and startups, optimize spatial distribution, and this has become very important when you think about value chains. You have to see what advantage which location might have. FDI, we are suggesting that we need to think about FDI differently. In the past, if you just try to attract money, funds, often all that funds do is it can lead to asset inflation, rise in property values, and things like that. But what we want FDI to do, and we are asking government, and the new government is very receptive to it, that we want FDI is one that will provide increasing technological capabilities, and especially in value chain things, which is not just the FDI which will develop the capability in that subsidiary or that firm, but in the other parts which of the economy which interface with that. Maintaining okay, this is we've talked about. There are some policy and institutional things which is sort of, one of them is on priority for exports, why it's important, we can come to that. Skill development, one or two things that I want to take, and I think I'm run out of time, right? Okay. Last one is okay, rather than, I'm sorry I've gone very, very fast, but you can get most of it from the stuff, and I'm happy to, I'll be here for another day if you have the patience and you want to ask me any question. But I want to now just go for two more slides, and which are saying which are the factors, and pull together things which may have hinted, but just to sort of give you some takeaways. What is it that will be useful to enter this industry, and what is useful to maintain your competitiveness and move up the value chain? Facilitating infrastructure for the knowledge economy. Basically, in this one, it means providing the right talent, skills, development, making sure your education system provides people with certain useful skills, it is connected with the needs of the industry and so on, as well as certain other things, people who want to do some innovative work are able to do that. Knowledge economy, to start with, you can think of, if knowledge is too vague a word, digital economy. A vibrant innovation system, promoting innovation, and there I'm sure in your thing you must have talked about various ways countries are promoting innovation system. The one that is very important is movement of people across borders. Increasingly, what those of you are familiar with trade negotiations and trade regulations, etc., you might have heard about all the sort of problems we have had in negotiating service agreements and all that. First, people used to think about mode 1, which is trade and services, just delivering service. Then you have FDI, which is mode 3. But in this area, it is mode 4, which is very important. And that is, mode 4 is where you actually move people. Now let me ask you, you might say, why is mode 4 important? In the beginning, it was because how the Indian IT industry started. Indian IT industry started because in the 90s, 80s and 90s, the Americans needed programmers. They couldn't find programmers at cost now. So a lot of what Indian companies initially were doing was not doing much work in India. They were just training them in India and sending them overseas. That's it. But now it's not because of that. Because most of this work, this is project oriented. When you go and say, suppose you are a company in America, and let's say Target or even a small company, you say, I need a system whereby I can integrate my customer relationship management with my billing and my accounting, etc. Each company has its own thing. So it's a project idea. So you need people to go and understand, even if people are there, they need to meet face to face, build trust so that they can then fix the thing, etc. So movement of people is very important. So cross-border movement of people is another thing which is coming up later, which is cross-border movement of data, and this is another area that is important. That's related to international connectivity. Now, when you talk about international connectivity in manufacturing, it also often has to do with roads and ports. In this, the reason India was able to do that is our Indian roads and ports are in dismal shape. But what we did in the 80s was the government liberalized and said companies could establish virtual networks, actually dedicated lines, and that's how it evolved into that. Secondly, we have found through our own research, airports become very important. In the beginning, when if you're giving, you're serving companies overseas, they want to be able to come and see how you're doing it. So that's why we wondered why, even though it was so expensive in some of these big cities, why were companies keeping on locating? They told us our customers want to be able to visit at short notice. So that's the hard part. The soft infrastructure has to do with global standards and interoperability. If you develop a system and if it can't work from one system to another, it becomes difficult to do. Conducive business environment is a euphemism for saying a business environment where government policies are predictable and transparent. So people know what to do. The reason for that is, and this is true for all global chains, that if you have a system, it's one thing, suppose you are a small company and everything, you buy your inputs and sell and you produce something, even if the rules of the game change, you can adjust. But if you are part of a chain, any change here has implications up and down the thing. That makes it very difficult. So people who are if you are able to maintain supply chain integrity, you need a predictable and transparent environment. Of course, people will always say, oh, lower your taxes, this, that. But more than that, we have found we had a lot of fight with our government because they changed the tax rules. And we said, we don't care about the level of the tax you're doing. That's what our members said. I don't care about the level, but don't change the rules of the game. Suddenly you make this part of my business unviable and this part messing up something else. I have my internal system whereby one subsidiary sells to the other and things like that, and you suddenly made a mess of my accounting system. We are shutting shop and going. So we had to explain this to our government. They wouldn't say, they said, well, it doesn't matter. I said, it doesn't matter to you, but it totally messes up their management system. Predictability and transparency is very important. Effective talent management ecosystem, it's just making sure students can study, they can get skills, they are aware of what is happening. This is, policy inclinations, I've already told you. The policy implication is, this is an industry which is providing new avenues both for entry and diversification. Small and medium enterprises may not have done so well. Actually, historically, let me tell you, all these billion-dollar companies that we have were 10 years ago were startups. 15 years ago, they were startups. Okay, so this is an avenue for small and medium enterprises. Foreign direct investment rules have to be thought of differently. Don't get them to focus, have the incentives so that they make the investments that will maximize the technology transfer. Incidentally, technology transfer, you can have all sorts of sophisticated things. I've worked in this area for 30 years, including in the IT area, but an industrial policy at the World Bank, and even in infrastructure. Eventually, technology transfer occurs through movement of people. So today, a lot of our startups are not startups with college students starting. It's typically people who have been working for 10, 15 years in a particular enterprise, Indian or foreign. They say, oh, why am I doing something? I do this. These guys make billions of dollars. I get only a little bit. And then they break out, 3 or 4 of them get together and start something. That's the I've talked about mode 4 service, international trade policies and agreements. I don't know about, perhaps some of you may be more familiar with it, but actually in our country, many of mode 4 service is well understood. Our government is we have told them focus on that, if nothing else. And so they've been very, I presume you're from India, so many of we were negotiating FTAs with Europe and others, and they are very sensitive about this because of immigration, and they tried their best to tell the government, get this off the table. But there was one thing that we told our government you cannot do, is get it off the table. So cross-border data flows, it's a new thing. This is occurring now. It's going to be a huge amount for this area. And basically revisiting analysis and negotiating positions, I'm sure this whole course has told you about, that when you think in terms of value chains, many of your some typical trade policy prescriptions, you have to rethink them. Tax regime and fiscal issues, these also change. I don't have time to go into it. Some of you may be from the Ministry of Finance, probably you don't. If you're not, you may not. But things like transfer pricing, how do you treat intellectual property, intangible assets, these in this industry, those are very important. And I have found as a developing country person that I've been there, and I've got most of our governments are not prepared for this. The agenda is being set by the developed countries, and what we don't want, what we do not want to happen is what happened with TRIPS. Many people, I don't know how many of you are familiar with what happened in TRIPS. What happened is the developed countries basically bullied the developing countries. They said, you will not get market access unless you sign on to these sorts of things. And we signed on to things, and people have written, my ex-boss Joe Stiglitz has written on it, and what we want is, we have to negotiate. Nobody is going to give us freebies. I'm presuming most people are from developing countries. Nobody is going to give us freebies, but we need to be educated and informed and negotiate from a position of knowledge. Don't let us be negotiating from a position of ignorance. So that's the main thing on this one. I've said a lot. The whole idea behind this is not paralysis by analysis. So that's what this is. The whole thing about it is, do your analysis, do your thinking, but we need action. But that's pretty much. I'll just stop here. Sorry, it took much longer than I thought.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khanna.